What's your advice to somebody who's trying to lose weight, but in a sustainable way? So not like, in some ways when bodybuilders are doing it, it's not really sustainable because they're really starving themselves down to a competition.
Yeah.
And the way that they're eating during that period of time, it's so catabolic that they're destroying their endocrine system along the way, but it's short-lived and they're going to refeed when they're done. You know, what's your view on the sustainable way to lose 10 pounds and keep it off in terms of deficit?
I think your perception of what bodybuilders do as far as aggression towards their diet is hinged on their final outcome and how steep it is to get there cumulatively, but the way they arrive there, no one is more mindful of preserving tissue than bodybuilders.
So in other words, they're not creating huge deficits at any one point in time.
Eventually they are at the point that they absolutely need to, but they're more careful than any human I know.
Oh yeah, I would believe.
Basically, the staggered approach you want to take is that you don't really want to lose more than, I think typically it's like 1% of your body weight per week is a general rule of thumb, which is, I guess could be, depending how obese you are, could be a little bit aggressive, but even let's just say a pound a week maybe is like maybe a more reasonable target.
Yeah.
But in general, if you are, and this is kind of perhaps a more applicable cookie cutter recommendation, 1 gram per pound of body weight, which I think everyone would essentially agree with in a deficit to sustain tissue, lean tissue, muscle mass. And then from there, you want to be whatever your maintenance calories is, which is, you know, it might take a little bit of finagling to figure out what this is when you've never done it before, but there are calculators online that roughly ballpark give you what will be plus minus 300 calories or something of what it takes to stably hold your body weight for, like if you ate that diet, it wouldn't go up or down. Some amount of calories where you're dropping, you know, 300, I feel like is a good deficit to start at. Because ideally, and this is kind of the whole general approach without getting way too boring for everyone, is you want to keep your protein where it needs to be, which is 1 gram per pound. You want to have enough carbs to fuel performance, which depending on what sport you're doing can vary, but without getting too complicated, a good split a lot of people follow is 40% protein, 40% carbs, 20% fat. And this is kind of like a ratio that allows you to sustain hormone production and have some amount of fat that supports it, carbs for some level of gym performance, and then protein for hopefully hitting your goals. And it'll depend on the person and modulate accordingly.
Would you say creatine is hands down the best over-the-counter supplement for performance?
For sure. Yeah. Can't think of anything off the top of my head that would be superior. Depending on your sport, though, because if
weight is everything, if you're a cyclist or a runner, the downside of the extra 5 pounds of lean mass is probably not valuable.
But making sure you're getting your, you have some sort of number you're going to adhere to, and you know how to measure every day, which basically is just reading every nutritional label you have and becoming intimately aware of what you're ingesting. If you put something in your mouth, you count it, regardless if it's a sauce, regardless if it's a drink, regardless if it's a lick, like you count that shit.
I see. So the mobilization doesn't require that you're clearly not going to oxidize everything you ate. Like if they just ate 800 calories, they're not going to burn 800 calories on a walk of any duration. But just getting out there and walking, you're saying, leads to better fuel partitioning.
Seemingly, yeah.
Interesting.
And I think that is, and you could correct me if I'm wrong.
I mean, I've certainly anecdotally noticed the improvement in blood sugar.
Yeah. Like it's, even for stabilization of like energy levels too, like making sure you're not hanging out on a couch with your spiked blood glucose seems to be pretty impactful, not just for mental performance, but also for, partitioning and actually optimizing body composition too. So, and that's in enhanced ranks at guys eating exorbitant amounts. But anyways, back to the layman in general, you're in a 300 deficit, you kind of milk that for all you can. And by that, I mean, the biggest problem, and I guess one of the biggest takeaways from this whole discussion could be that the people who aggressively cut way too fast will end up losing more weight off the bat, but they will end up in a state of adaptation faster, whereby you are basically going to not only expend less calories at rest via the depression of like non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is like fidgets and moving with just like your everyday activities. You will actually start to subconsciously do that less. In addition, you are pushing yourself to a state of nutrient deprivation much sooner than was necessary to achieve a fat loss outcome. So rather than trying to lose, 6 pounds in 2 weeks, why don't I go with, like 1 to 2 pounds at most and actually milk what I can out of that little tiny calorie increment before I decide, okay, do I need to then add some more cardio to my regimen, or do I want to decrease food by another 100 calories, or do I want to add, metabolic enhancing pharmacology? You can actually make the call at that point because you've exhausted the actual increment and you're not unnecessarily depressing hormone production and also putting yourself into a hole of what is essentially a malnourished state. Because if you push too hard and you go from, let's just say you're eating 2,800 calories a day and you instantly drop to 1,800, you will lose a ton of weight off the rip, and you'll think, oh, this is great. And then very soon you will get to a point where it's like, holy hell, I am starving. This is not sustainable. What am I doing? What do I do next? I plateaued now, and where do I go from here? It becomes easy to dig yourself into a hole if you're not careful about this like titration down, essentially. So I typically recommend trying to milk what you can until weight loss has averaged out at neutral for at minimum a few days, but typically a week. And then from there, because as a natural, you are very susceptible to major aberrations in hormone suppression if you are going to deprive the hell out of nutrients. And especially if you're doing huge amounts of cardio concurrently because you think that's what you need to be doing. Also, don't put yourself in a hole on the energy expenditure side.